good morning, and welcome back to Channel Inside Podcast. I'm your host, Dinara, and today we are going to talk about the impact of AI on neuroscience, on marketing and business strategies. And I'm absolutely thrilled and honored to welcome Roger Dooley, a pioneer in applying neuroscience to marketing and businesses. And also, Roger is the author of the two influential books, Friction and By Influence. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Well, thanks for having me on, Dinara. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Roger, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience and to our guests so we get to know you and learn about your journey?
Well, yeah, my journey was pretty long. I may not have time for all of it, but I guess the relevant thing is I began life as an engineer for a few years, transitioned into management in the corporate world. And I finally reached what I thought was sort of the pinnacle of the corporate world. I was just 30 and was in charge of strategy for a Fortune 1000 company. And I bailed out to become an entrepreneur. And I've been an entrepreneur of sorts ever since. Started a few successful businesses, including one called College Confidential that I co founded. It became the biggest website for college bound students and parents. And we ultimately sold that to the Daily Mail Group. While this was happening, it's probably 20 plus years ago, I saw two areas coming together, neuroscience and marketing. And there didn't seem to be like much of a match there, but there were then some early companies that were trying to use the tools of neuroscience to gauge customer reactions to advertising, to packaging, and so on. And to me, this is really a fascinating thing. I started writing about it. And as it evolved, in those days, the only companies that could afford to do these neuromarketing studies were big brands, BMW, Coca-Cola, and really even they could only use it for big problems, a major ad campaign, a Super Bowl ad, or not which picture do we put on the website. So I began writing more and more about bringing in behavioral science as part of that because it's really all a continuum. You're trying to understand how your customer's brain works and how they're processing what you're giving them and how they respond to your appeals to them. And what the reason I did that was because the tools of behavioral science, consumer psychology, the ideas of people like Robert Cialdini, BJ Fogg, Daniel Kahneman, and so on, these are accessible to any size company. Anybody can go to Amazon and buy their writings or even find information online that condenses that. And to me, this was really important because just talking to big brands, to me, was very limiting. To me, I wanted to make these ideas accessible to even the smallest businesses, or even in large businesses, something that somebody in a small department could use effectively on relatively small problems that you couldn't spend tens of thousands of dollars on to study.
That's really fascinating. I mean, I work a lot with marketing people myself, but I never really understood the importance of neuroscience. And I have to be honest, I haven't read your books yet. But are we so predictable as consumers in terms of how we interact with brands and how, brands nurture the loyalty to consumers? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that side of things?
I wouldn't say that people are completely predictable, but there are some rules that marketers and anybody trying to persuade consumers can follow. I think the most famous are Robert Cialdini's originally six, now seven principles of influence. They've been around for 40 plus years. He just had his 40th anniversary of his book Influence some months back last year. These principles, things like social proof, what are other people doing? Marketers just do this without even thinking. We've got 20,000 subscribers to our newsletter, or we've sold 50,000 of these already. What you're doing there is showing that other people are doing this, so it's a safe thing to do. It's a good thing to do. Or using authority, where you have an expert, either a celebrity or an expert, recommend your product. That gives credibility to your persuasive claims. And you can go on and on. There's a reciprocation. If I do something for you, Dinara, you're more likely to do something for me in return. But I mean, these are basic principles that people generally tend to follow. I mean, it's not like a magic button you can push, but
Yeah.
by understanding them, you can create marketing that works better, that is more likely to succeed. And you see big companies doing this all the time. If you go to an airline site or a travel site like a Booking or Hotels.com or something, you'll see messages like only two seats left at this price, only one room left. This is scarcity, another Cialdini principle. And you'll also see things like 23 people booked this hotel in the last 24 hours, social proof. And you go on and on, but these things have been proven to work, and that's why you see them everywhere. And you can't use all of them all the time, but it's something that really every marketer needs to be familiar with and employ selectively. Different appeals are going to work better in particular situations, and depending on which tools you have to work with. You may not have an authority figure yet to recommend your product.
I must admit, Roger, I'm a sucker for this. If I see someone else have booked or it's just one room left, I think, oh, and even if it's a misconception or it's a lie, I would definitely go and book it. It's so interesting. But Roger, in your experience, what is the most common misconceptions marketeers have about how consumers make decisions?
Well, I think that there are still some marketers that expect people to respond rationally to an appeal. In other words, gee, we're not selling enough. Let's just drop the price because we know that will motivate people to buy, or use other sort of very rational persuasion methods. Explain, here are our features and benefits. This is why you should buy our product. Now, that's not to say they're not important. In fact, what I always suggest is that marketers use both conscious persuasion, which would be things like, here's how our product will save you money, or here's why it will help your business, or whatever your claims are. Yes, have those. Those are important. But also use some of these non-conscious persuasion techniques. And for me, that's really the sweet spot. Don't just count on explaining to customers why your product is going to work better for them and expect them to now say, okay, we'll take it. It's never that simple, unfortunately.
Yeah, and maybe it's about also A/B testing, trying different techniques for your brand and seeing how it pans out. Also, maybe some techniques could work differently in different cultures, for example, or countries when brands expand. Do you think there is this cultural element?
Yes, there is absolutely a cultural element. Lots of research on that showing that different cultures react differently to different kinds of persuasive appeals. And particularly where there are significant cultural differences, Asian cultures tend to be more collectivist and less individualistic. So an appeal that emphasizes individualism may work in the US or Western countries, are going to be less likely to work in some Asian countries, for example. And you mentioned A/B testing. I am a big fan of any kind of actual testing that you can perform. One thing about neuromarketing studies is they are trying to predict how people will behave. In other words, you show consumers an ad and you measure their subconscious responses to it, and you say, okay, I think that this ad will persuade them to buy. That's fine. But when you can actually run a test, when you can compare message A versus message B in a real world setting with real world customers, with real world website visitors, to me, that is much better data in most cases. Now, you can't always do that. You can't do an A/B test on your Super Bowl ad if you're going to surprise people with it on Super Bowl Sunday. If you've got a website that has quite a bit of traffic or a mobile app that has a lot of usage, to me, testing has to be one very important part of your toolkit. Yes, use the tools from behavioral science to create alternate messages, but then just test them, see what really works. Don't assume they're going to work if you have the ability to test.
That's interesting. And I think when we talk about the data and all the insights that we're able to extract these days with all the modern tools, I think it's worth mentioning AI, artificial intelligence tools. What is your opinion on this? Do you think AI will actually boost the all the studies of neuroscience on the marketing studies, or how will AI transform the relationship between brands and consumer psychology, for example?
Well, AI is already having a big impact in some ways. For instance, one common tool that is neuromarketers use, it's not neuroscience per se, but that is eye tracking, where you measure where people are looking while they watch your video or look at your print advertisement or your website. And particularly in conjunction with maybe some neuroscience measures, that can tell you a lot. In fact, without the eye tracking data, you may have difficulty figuring out what's going on. But today, many companies, I know of 4 at least, have trained AI using machine learning on thousands of human eye tracking studies to create an algorithm that will predict where humans will look. So instead of bringing people into a lab and using these expensive glasses or sensors to measure where people are looking, you can put your video or your print ad in front of this algorithm and it will predict where real humans will look. The companies that create these tools claim 90 to 95% and even up efficiency or accuracy.
Wow.
Now, they aren't perfect. I've seen some sort of surprising errors, simply because that particular AI had not been trained on those types of images. So if you've trained them on one set of images, like a whole bunch of print ads, and then you throw out a totally different kind of image at it, it may not work as well. But I think that the more data that these models get, the better and better they are. And the really interesting thing about that, Dinara, is that these tools are very cheap. You can run a comparative tests, say on a couple of layouts of a print ad in just a matter of seconds or minutes using these. Now, I've done some of that myself, where I've said, okay, well, what are people looking at on my website, and done the quick AI check, and okay, then I've made the headline bigger and call to action a different color, and run it again. And this is such a very quick, iterative, inexpensive process. Even if it's not perfect, everybody will acknowledge that it is not as good as human eye tracking studies, but it gives you some data, and that makes it useful, particularly, again, in smaller problems where you can't afford the big, expensive studies. Now, another area that AI is starting to have an impact, and this is something that I talk a lot about in my Neuromarketing 2.0 speeches, is how AI can be your persuasion partner or your behavioral science wingman by providing really tremendous expertise at your fingertips. I mean, most marketers may have read Cialdini's book a few years ago and maybe skimmed through Thinking Fast and Slow, and they remember a lot of stuff, and they've seen some other, read some other content in there. But I mean, nobody, even the top professors in the field, can't remember every single thing that they've written, much less that everybody else has written. This is where I think AI can help, where you can present a problem, whatever your persuasion problem is. You're trying to convert more visitors on your website. You're trying to get more applicants to your university, whatever your problem is. And you can do a very detailed analysis of that using tools like Claude or ChatGPT. And it's important that you can't just say, hey, what should I do? It's you really have to prime it properly, make sure it's got the right knowledge base and it's been prompted to give you answers. And then furthermore, to explore those in depth and to consider alternatives. I mean, there's a whole process for thoroughly prompting AI. But what this does is it gives you really professional advice. I mean, before you might have to call in a person from Cialdini's group or somebody like me and say, okay, we need some consulting on this to get these insights. Now, I think in many cases, the expensive consultant can be eliminated, again, depending on the problem and its importance. If this is a decision that's going to affect the future of a major corporation, okay, maybe you don't rely solely on AI. But,
Yeah.
if you're trying to redesign your website or create a modest new ad campaign for your latest product introduction, it can be a very powerful tool for that. I've seen it in action. To me, it's very effective. In fact, when I've asked it to provide advice as Roger Dooley, would, amazingly, it's come up with ideas that were very resonant with what I would have done. In fact, I did a speech at a conference that it was for chiropractors of all things. Basically, I posed the problem: how can a new chiropractor practice get more patients? And using my ideas, amazingly, it predicted the exact topics that I had used in my actual speech. So to me, that was
Really? AI
very,
predicted.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I'd already used them, so maybe prediction is the wrong word, but the ideas that it identified were exactly the major ideas that I had used. And I was impressed by that for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a lot of information about my stuff out there. My book is probably out there and so on. but nowhere to the extent that, say, the ideas of Bob Cialdini are. But despite that, it accurately predicted what I would say. This is a very powerful tool, and it's only going to get better as it can absorb more knowledge, hold more knowledge in its mind, so to speak, at one time. And as we get better at prompting it.
Roger, it's interesting, but jokes aside, how does it make you feel that somebody, would have asked for your consultants and now you're losing the chunk of business in a way to AI? So are you saying that AI would potentially replace some of the consultancy and be better than consultants themselves?
I wouldn't say it would be better than consultants themselves because certainly there is a human element involved. There's a back and forth dialogue, and there's other areas of experience that come into play, personal business experience, and so on. But I mean, to me, I don't really worry about it. I'm really trying to do as little consulting as possible, and if somebody can apply my ideas through ChatGPT or Claude, I mean, that's perfectly fine with me. I hope that more and more people do it.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Just talking about your books a little bit more. So you wrote two books, Friction and Brainfluence Influence. So could you tell us a little bit more why these books are written? What inspired you to write these books? And what are the, let's say, key learnings we can take away as a reader from those books?
Right. Well, Brainfluence was the book I wrote first, and that was in the earlier days of neuromarketing. And what I wanted to do was bring some of these ideas to people in a way, again, that anybody could use, either somebody in a department in a big company or somebody in an entrepreneurial company, a startup, or a small agency. And so that was basically 100 different ways that you could employ these ideas. And I focused on different areas: writing copy, pricing strategy. I mean, there's a huge amount of pricing psychology. People have written entire books about that topic alone. I only included a section on it, but it was to give business people some starting points in basically most of the areas that they would have to deal with as marketers, whether it's writing headlines or setting prices and so on. So that's really done very well. It's now, I think, in 11 translations around the world. It's still in print, still selling. So I've been very pleased with that. My second book is Friction, and this was an outgrowth of my trying to show people that you needed to do more than just be persuasive. And you also have to eliminate obstacles to action. And it ended up being a much more encompassing book than just how to get more customers or how to get more orders. But that's a key part of it. And it's all about making things easier and how extra effort, unnecessary effort, changes human behavior. And it changes it in every field. There is, it doesn't matter if you're talking about sales and marketing, if you're talking about how people behave in a country where there's a lot of bureaucracy or less bureaucracy, uh, how people behave internally, employee experience. To me, something that goes hand in hand with customer experience is employee experience, because you really can't expect to deliver a fantastic customer experience if your employee experience isn't good too. If they're frustrated, if they're disengaged. And today, Dinara, so many employees are not engaged with their work or their company. The numbers are staggering. I think right now, less than 1 out of 3 U.S. employees is considered to be engaged with their work or their employer. And that's really scary because you've got all these other people who are more or less putting in their time, and you're expecting them to be highly productive, to deliver a great customer experience. And to me, uh, eliminating friction, eliminating wasted effort is a key part of it. Because when your people know that you are trying to make their job easier, eliminate those wasted steps, those layers of approval that just frustrate them,
Mm.
they know when their time is being wasted. And it's even more frustrating when they go to their boss and say, hey, we really don't have to go through this extra process here. We could skip that step and say, well, no, we got to do it that way. That's what, the way we're supposed to do it, or just make up excuses.
Yeah.
This is why people get disengaged. They say, okay, well, the company doesn't care about me, my productivity, so why should I care? And when you start taking the friction out of your customer experience, making things easier for them, and of your employee experience, that's when you can really start to achieve success in your business, because your people will become friction hunters. They'll see that you're serious about getting rid of these elements of wasted effort, wasted time, and they will start finding more of them for you to get rid of. So, yeah, I mean, to me, that's the goal. Turn your entire team into a team of friction hunters. Some companies have recognized the importance of friction. Back in 1997, Jeff Bezos was talking about frictionless shopping when a lot of companies were still trying to figure out what e-commerce was. And he did everything possible to make it as easy as one possibly can to buy from Amazon. Just a few years later, they patented one-click ordering, spent millions of dollars to defend that patent, even when other companies challenged it in court and figured, well, you can't really patent something that simple as ordering with one click. And he won. But what did they get for that? The only effort that they imposed on their competitors was one little click. That's it. Just one tiny little click. But for them, it was worth all that effort, all those millions of dollars in legal fees. So, but a lot of companies do not have that commitment. In fact, yesterday I published an article at Forbes and a post on LinkedIn about an experience that I had with Sam's Club, which is a unit of Walmart, one of their major competitors, previously the biggest retailer, but just last quarter dethroned by Amazon when Amazon had a blowout quarter and actually surpassed Walmart in sales. And how frustrating the experience was in shopping in their store, where they force you to self-checkout, which is fine if you have a few items, but if you've got a whole cart full of stuff and you're having to laboriously scan each one, put it in the other cart. And what I found was we couldn't even buy a snack at their little cafe because you needed the app to do it, and you needed to order through the app. And so I start downloading the app in the store, and then you've got to establish a payment method, and you've got to sort through, find where you're supposed to order. And then it just got so complicated. We gave up, we quit, and we paid for the merchandise and left the store. But I mean, this company is not looking at customer effort. They're looking at their own efficiency. I'm sure that forcing people to order through the app ends up being very efficient for the person who is behind the counter making the pizza, but it's not efficient for the customer. It's frustrating for the customer.
Yes, no, thank you so much for explaining this to me, that the title Friction. I wondered what it was about. Now it makes all sense to me. So you were talking about customer experience, you were talking about employee experience, and I must mention partner experience, because I work in a B2B business, where we talk about partner experience, and partners like distributors and resellers, they are our customers, and I'm sure we should treat them the same way and eliminate all these frictions, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you're dealing with, I mean, depending on what you call these companies that you work with, partner, customer, or supplier, or whatever, making things as easy as possible is always going to lead to better results because people preferentially gravitate towards those activities where they're more productive, where they're not wasting their time. And a lot of times it's unconscious. Sometimes it's conscious. Like after that experience that I wrote about yesterday, I consciously said, I'm going to shop more at Costco and avoid Sam's whenever I can. But in many other cases, it's not conscious. And I'll give you an example from history. Here in the state of Texas, we have an 8% sales tax approximately. So every time we make a purchase, we pay that. For a long time, you didn't pay that if you were shopping online. So it was a sort of little bonus. If you placed an e-commerce order, you didn't end up paying that extra 8%. But then the state started to crack down, and Amazon was one of the first companies to be forced to charge this 8%. And so when that happened, I said, I'm going to shop less at Amazon. I'm going to shop around. I'd be stupid to pay an extra 8% to Amazon. But when I look back a year later, my behavior had changed almost zero, simply because it was so easy to shop at Amazon comparing to shopping around, setting up an account, getting out my credit card, doing all those things that I'd have to do to order from someplace else. And of course, wondering if I could trust them as much as Amazon. And so my behavior didn't change. That was a significant price difference that I had consciously said I was going to avoid, but unconsciously, my parents tell me, don't mess around, just click that one click button and get it from Amazon. It'll be on your doorstep tomorrow. And this is how it can work both consciously and non-consciously.
Thank you so much, Roger. I know we need to wrap up now, but before I let you go, can you please tell me what is the most favorite country you have ever visited and why you were so impressed with it?
Wow, that is a really difficult question. I'll pick one that is hopefully won't offend anybody whose country I leave out. We just got back, and it isn't exactly a country; it's a continent. But we just got back from an expedition trip to Antarctica, and I have to admit that was an otherworldly experience. I mean, the scenery, the penguins, the whales, everything was just like no place else on Earth. And so, I guess at the moment, I'll say that's my favorite.
And it was freezing, yeah? Freezing cold.
Actually, it was cold, but not that cold. It was literally just about freezing. So if you're thinking in Celsius, maybe a -1 to +2.
That's okay.
So it really it wasn't bad. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is snow country. So those kinds of temperatures are when you start wearing long pants instead of shorts. But of course, since you're going out over open water in Zodiac, you do have to dress warmly for it because there's wind, there's salt spray, and so on. But it wasn't as frigid as I expected.
Roger, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And there are so many other questions I wanted to ask you. We must do part two at some point. Thank you so much, Roger.
Well, thank you, Dinar. Happy to be here.